part of the requirement of phase one.
Yeah, push it to tier classification.
To push it
Already
into
have-
tier classification, so then it doesn't have this same.
Yeah, actually, I think,
You know,
I
that
think
might
that
be the
would
right
work.
time.
Yeah,
Right.
I agree.
Because
Because you have
if we don't have a
to,
place where you're required to actually do some type of risk assessment,
right.
like really early on,
People
the
aren't gonna
first
do it.
90 days,
Right.
it's not gonna get, I mean, honestly, it's not gonna
Yeah.
get done.
Isn't that one of the
And it's
check
not
boxes
gonna
for
get done
tier
routinely,
one site?
especially
It
if you don't
is.
have risk
Well,
assessment
we
now.
could,
Tier one is a good place to put
But
it.
tier one might be, right, at the phase one point,
And I.
tier classification.
and that's
Yeah.
already consistent with the current.
So taking a step back, what, right now, we have the requirement that, you know, at every point in the process, you should always be keeping in the back of your mind that there might be an imminent hazard. You should be identifying it. So what I'm hearing is that that might not always occur in as timely a fashion as we want. So having a point in time where somebody has to, somebody is required to actively evaluate whether or not and opine on it, regardless of kind of what they're seeing, not just relying upon what they see out there, but making them stop and do it is useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although-
It is, I mean, I think for LSPs.
And that might be
don't
true
have-
separate of.
Right, but for LSPs that don't have risk assessment capabilities in-house,
Yeah.
it's challenging for them to kind of, it's much more challenging. It's way easier for an LSP who has a risk assessor who sits down the hall to say, can you go run these numbers for me?
Right.
Than if you don't have that capability.
Which is why I think it actually would be valuable, Paul, to have some default trigger numbers so that people who aren't risk assessors would be like, oh my God, if I have these kind of compounds, this is something I need to, you know, even be as part of tier classification.
Well, I guess my concern with that is if we're pushing back from this, like, what really is an imminent hazard, which is the stuff that really has to be dealt with right away, I mean, then what's your new time frame?
Well,
So,
I
and
think,
1 year is not really, I mean, 1 year, you know, if it's almost like, if it wasn't so bad,
Yeah.
is 1 year exposure really so terrible?
yeah.
That doesn't
Yeah.
Wait.
Well, then,
Well, but I do think there's good luck, because in this section of the reg right now, there's an implied requirement to essentially do an imminent hazard evaluation in an iterative way and like constant, but I think to your point, that's not happening in a lot of places. And so to have a clear, so the only places where it's sort of explicit in the MCP that you have to like do a risk assessment like for everything at your site is sort of at phase 2, and then if you're coming to like some closure point. So to have a point early on where it is explicit like that you do need to look at all these risks and here's how you need to do it, and then if there are unacceptable risks identified for short-term, for current and some sort of short-term closure, to then have some sort of expedited response, that makes sense. But I do think, to address your point, like having it be explicit that you need to do a risk assessment.
And I guess if you push
Early
it on
makes
time,
sense.
you could push it up to a 120-day notification time period. But if you push it much
What-
more forward than that, then you're not really accomplishing anything in terms of, other than changing the name.
Is the, maybe I'm wrong about this, but is the ability to evaluate whether there's an imminent hazard, doesn't the short form do that stuff for people? Right away?
If you have those constituents and you have those scenarios, but there are scenarios that are not covered currently by the short form. So it could even be something like construction worker. You know, it could be an exposure that's not currently incorporated into the short forms. In general, the short forms are great, and I teach a class on it, and I think that everybody, you know, should be, you don't have to be a risk assessor to use them, but I frankly, I agree with Eileen. I don't think people are even thinking about it. They're thinking about, what are my notification obligations? They're looking at, you know, things like RCs and those things. So I think, I do like the idea of putting it in the tier classification, and that it might be a box. So like right now, you're tier 1 if you have a current imminent hazard. So you can think about, from an agency perspective, do we want to capture things that are a substantial hazard over whatever time
I don't know
period.
if I have to get pushed up to tier one.
No, I don't know either, but you have to have something that's gonna trigger accelerated response actions, or this is all moot. And if that's your concern, we
Well,
need
you
to.
can still do it as part of the phase one, and it may be that you have an IRA notification as part of your phase one.
But it might not be if we're changing what an IRA is, it might
Well,
not
maybe
be.
Well, it
it
could
is.
still
Maybe
be an
it's
IRA.
not.
It could
Yeah,
be
it would
an
be
an
IRA.
IRA.
Oh, an IRA,
Yeah.
But not an IRA,
Okay.
it's not,
Yeah.
he's trying not to tell everybody that,
It's-
it's an imminent hazard.
Right, right.
But I
Yeah,
think, I think being clear that like you do need to do a risk assessment and not have it be sort of implied. That at some point, early, you need to look at all your data and the short terms are fine for most of these things, they're gonna.
They're
catch
based on
up.
5 years right
Yeah.
now, though, so we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Well, you could do that you could do that for a 120-day notification instead of phase one.
Right,
You have to
you
evaluate
can.
if it was an imminent hazard, but you have to be explicit about it.
So I want to hear from you
Yeah.
guys out there,
Yeah,
because
no.
I have two risk assessors
I
here.
have a couple
Yeah.
thoughts.
And
One
one person
concern,
just talked
first of all, I come from a basis where I would hate to be able to do less assessment and cleanup as quickly as we currently do it. I would hate to be able to change things to try to fix whatever we're trying to fix, which is unclear to me right now. I think the one thing is that we don't want people to get too concerned, but changing the terminology, I think, has implications that I'm concerned with. And then the other thing that I run across very frequently are when I try to explain the different risk thresholds, imminent hazard, and for a carcinogen it would be 5 years. I hear it all the time. I've been in this building for more than 5 years. I've lived here for 20 years.
Yeah.
I hear that all the time, all different permutations of how long, it's already beyond imminent for me. What's double imminent, stuff like that.
Yeah,
Right.
So I don't know how we're gonna manage that. That's something that we currently don't have a way to manage, and I don't know
well,
if
it's
that this is gonna fix
retrospective
this.
risk, and that's always, we're
Yeah.
always looking at
And-
now
and-
and in the
But
future.
to then say, to then add on to that, by changing the terms and making things take longer to address, that just exacerbates what some people's situation already is.
So I
But-
think,
The other thing that, if I could, the other thing is when you change the terminology, the statute has certain requirements for what we need to do. We have to ensure, MassDEP has to ensure that imminent hazards are eliminated. Is that the right word? Eliminated or abated or?
Yeah.
Eliminated and mitigated are the two.
And again, I feel like that is an important part of the statute, that now when we start changing things and making less things imminent hazards, we then have less of that legal authority to make sure that things get done in a timely way. And I am very concerned about that. I know that when I deal with people that are exposed to carcinogens, they are freaked out and trying to explain that another year or don't worry, we've got plenty of time to take care of this. That does not resonate with just about everybody that I've talked to.
Yeah, I'd like to see us approach this if this evaluation is not happening, or to look at ways that we can make it happen sooner and provide the tools for that rather than to push it off. I think that should be our first approach.
Well,
But one thing- a lot of it's also
back row is non-risk.
Pros and cons, right?
I think it's a risk assessment.
Oh,
Hearing pros and cons for some established screening values versus some more quantitative risk assessment. I think if you're really looking for someone to pay attention to what really concerns you guys, some promulgated screening values are a good way to go.
Problem
To lose those
with, problem
completely?
with 0321 is all those numbers are out of date because we don't update the regs
So
quick enough.
identify,
We've got, one of the values is below what the RC is for cadmium. It's crazy.
Right, so you have the problem of
So that's
having
why
to
I was
update.
saying the short form might be a better tool than putting things in the regs, because the regs can't be as fluid to change when risk metrics change.
Well, or the other thing, so if you think it's not being captured by, if we change the imminent hazard to really be more of a shorter term hazard, and like we said, we have CEP taking care of certain residential situations.
Indoor air and drinking water.
And drinking water. I think that I think that maybe having at least, a list then of comments, if we're not gonna put numbers in, but we wanna make people think about things sooner rather than later, we either have to put that in as part of notification and potentially, you know, that there's a requirement to do an evaluation, even if you're in a 120-day sort of notification situation, or you're gonna have to put, you know, compounds or numbers that say, if you have these, you know, you have to do it within a certain time period, or put numbers that say, if you are above these, you might have it. Like New Jersey, some other states have things that if you're sort of, they took their RCs, for example, and they made them, you know, multiply them by a factor of 10 or 100, and say, if you're above these, you need to do a risk assessment and potentially accelerated response action. So like they made that part of their, when you're first looking at your data, if you have things that are maybe 100 times RCs as part of your notification, you need to do an assessment, or some kind of simple way that someone who's not a risk assessor is gonna actually be thinking about it before, you know, tier classification.
Can I just take a step back? What prompted this reevaluation of what we characterize as imminent hazard? Because you said the risk numbers, or the numbers aren't gonna change to consider an imminent hazard. So the need to do something quickly is already there when you trigger it. So why are we doing this? Are we trying to make it more lax or more stringent?
More rational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like those choices.
Denise?
Partly, as I said, they're going back into the mid-90s. There were concerns, issues, we ran into difficulties explaining the difference between the imminent hazard terminology and kind of what it evokes in people, while still describing it as a 5-year potential exposure, and kind of scaring them on the one hand and then kind of backing off from that.
So it's perception?
It's perception, but it's, you know, time and time again, and, you know, site after site after site. And so that's from a perception point of view. And
5 years.
it has always troubled me that what we do mathematically does not align with the definitions in the statute. And you know, it's one of those things that, I mean, one option is, and option A maybe should be, we don't make any changes. That's, which I think is kind of to the point, that if it's working and it's working okay, whatever we do is going to have some issues, problems, you know, quirks, difficulties, because nothing is perfect. And so one thing to keep in mind is, as we go through this and evaluate different alternatives, is does it actually make anything better on the whole, holistically? If the overall process isn't improved, then, you know, why do it? So the way it's working now isn't necessarily bad, but I think the experience, my perception, and this is all my perception, right, of the experience that we've had with TCE, I found easier than what we went through with test report estimate. And I think at least some of it is when you describe our concerns about the health risk of TCE, right, and our concerns about a potential 2-week exposure during pregnancy, right, and what the health outcomes are, I think that aligns well with people's perception of what an imminent hazard actually is. And so when what we're doing aligns with the perception and it aligns with the statutory language, it seems to actually work.
You would come up with even a more urgent term for the TCE, as I recall, it was, when you had the different numbers, wasn't there something that was like beyond imminent hazard? It was
in the
More urgent.
more
Yeah.
right. It's really active.
When you're talking about evaluating one option is leaving it as is.
Yeah.
If you take the CEPs out of these, what ends up being in CEPs out of the universe, how many other imminent hazards do you have?
You do have them in workplaces, definitely.
I don't know, I'm just asking that, I mean, what, I mean, that means, to me, that's a question of, is it broken? If you only have a very small number of what falls into imminent hazards
Well, you get a
outside
lot,
of it.
you get a lot that are tripped by those numeric
Right,
soil
soil
hazards.
hazards.
So a lot of them.
That's what I've always kind of struggled with, was the 2-hour notification
Yeah.
for the metals and soil,
Yeah.
because having TCE in indoor air in a residence is an imminent hazard, and 45 milligrams per kilogram on a commercial property that's 500 feet away from a school is a different animal.
They're not necessarily imminent hazards, right? Those
Right,
are
that-
based
Well,
on
They
a
require-
residential
They
social
require,
group.
Require
you have
to do the
to,
evaluation.
you have
Yeah.
to notify, and then,
That's
And
right.
then-
and like you said, lead, I mean, I personally report a lot of 2 hours, or advise LSPs to report for lead, the 2 hour, and then you can figure out later if it really needs that evaluation, but,
Lead is in a different.
yeah, I know,
ballgame.
but
Yeah.
still, I
Yeah.
kind of
That's
disagree
real.
that
Yeah.
that doesn't get reported.
Yeah.